I'm Deborah Davidson, founder and artistic director of Catalyst Conversations. And before we get started, I want to take a moment to mark the passing of Laus Heder, a good friend to Catalyst and to all of us in the Boston area arts community. I'm very happy to welcome you to a Catalyst Conversation on this Friday evening. I believe it's the second day of spring. And I want to thank the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts for presenting the conversation with us. And I especially want to thank Chloe Tomasetta for all her work in realizing this program with us. Thanks also to the Cambridge Arts Council, our founding partner, our board, and all our volunteers who help us out, and to those of you who have donated. Catalyst Conversations was founded in 2012 to open a critical path for the dialogue between arts and science. We present intimate and provocative conversations between artists, scientists, and the public. And we're interested in connecting the two through programs, educational outreach, and public events like this, which demonstrate the important conversation and synergy between art, science, and technology. This evening's topic is Our Oceans, Our Coasts, and Us. The Nature Conservancy is dedicated to creating a world where both people and nature thrive. Grounded in rigorous science, TNC takes innovative conservation approaches from ideas to impactful action, scaling them to drive systematic change. As we confront the planetary crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, TNC works to protect and substantially manage our ocean, lands, and fresh water in partnership with communities with the hope of putting us on a path to a prosperous future. Artist Rebecca McGee Tuck, here, also explores that intersection of humans and nature. Collecting debris along the Massachusetts coastline, each piece carries a clear reminder of our impact on ocean and coastal ecosystems. Together, McGee Tuck, TNC and Massachusetts climate adaptation scientist Emma Gladesmith, and marine ecologist Jessica Griffin will discuss what is at stake in this moment and share their work, passion, and hope for our world and us. Attention to the underlying issues is especially important in this very challenging possible climate. And I look forward to learning more about the problems and possible solutions for our oceans and coasts that our speakers are urgently addressing. In her practice, Rebecca McGee Tuck has taken on the task of cleaning part of the coastline of debris from human activity, among other sources, and turning it into sculpture. The act is a way of reusing that debris, as well as calling attention to the dilemma of the plastic waste in our water. She says, "I am rooted in the reuse of discarded materials, creating found object fiber sculptures that resonate with sustainability and environmental consciousness. Through my work, I urge a reconsideration of our relationship with the environment." Emma Gildesgame, is the climate adaptation scientist for TNC in Massachusetts. She collaborates with communities and stakeholders to co-develop and implement equitable, nature-based solutions that benefit both people and nature at a pace and scale to match the urgency of climate change. Emma is passionate about elevating and empowering communities most impacted by climate change. She takes a holistic, people-centered approach when working with partners to secure funding and implement solutions that align with the community's needs and priorities. Jessica Griffin is the Coastal Sustainability Postdoc Research Fellow with Northeastern University and the Nature Conservancy. Here, she applies her research on eelgrass bivalve interactions to improve outcomes for eelgrass restoration and to understand the effects of oyster aquaculture on eelgrass. Her Ph.D. dissertation research focused on how climate changes eutrophication and invasive species, about intersections between eelgrass and bivalves. Each speaker now will speak for about 8 minutes, and then we'll gather closer together for a conversation. So we'll begin with Emma, then Jessica, and then Rebecca.
Thank you, Deborah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this Friday night. I'm here to talk to you about the changes that we're facing along our coast and a tool that I'm working on to add to the many, many ways that people across Massachusetts and beyond are working to keep people safer and work with instead of against nature as we move into the next chapter of life along our coast. Oh, and that advanced without me meaning to, so you get to see it a little bit earlier. So I'm going to start by setting the stage a little bit. PowerPoint wanted to give you a sneak preview. So it's always helpful to start with the science. This is, I'm just going to pause this. I don't know why it's advancing without me telling it to. There we go. So this is the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. It was produced by the state of Massachusetts with consultant help and lots of partner input to bring together sea level, storm predictions, ocean currents, waves, and other data to understand where we're going to see flooding into the future. So this is 2030. This is basically now in the scale of predictions. This is 5 years from now. And so it's a little hard to see, but those kind of red and orange colors counterintuitively are places that have between like a 0.1 and 0.5% chance of flooding every year. As you get into those richer, darker colors, the purples, the blues, the blacks, that's a 20 to 100% chance of flooding every year. So this is a pretty high chance of flooding, but it's not everywhere. A lot of the flooding is kind of 3 feet deep or less. Once you get above 3 feet, you're getting a lot more damage. So this is like not a great picture, especially if you look at some of our critical infrastructure pathways. If you think about on this image where train lines and schools and hospitals are, there is impact here. And we're doing a lot of work to keep all of that infrastructure, all of those homes, all of those people safer. But if we stop at 2030, we aren't done. Because 2070 is really scary. All of this is available online. You will be able to get these PowerPoints, and so you can click on this link, or if you just look for the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, you can play with this data online and you can zoom in wherever you want. But you can see the flooding comes all the way into where we are in Cambridge. It's like 2% chance of flooding every year, which sounds small, but like those 2% chance floods happen more and more frequently. You can see this 100% chance flooding moving up into Chelsea, up around, coming up the Mystic River, down the seaport is a whole different story. And some of these areas will have 3 to 5 and even in some places 10 feet of flooding. This is bad. I don't need to tell you that, you know that. And this is in part because Boston is a coastal city, and we don't have to imagine out to 2070 to visualize what this looks like. So all of these pictures that I'm going to show in my slide deck, they are all from something called the the Coastal Zone Management MyCoast website, where you too can upload pictures of flooding that you see, and you can see it's actually fascinating. So this is at just a particularly high tide. No storm, just a 2024 particularly high tide. This is the January 2024 storm in Revere, where it was a high tide, but it wasn't like a dramatically high tide. It just coincided with a not particularly big coastal storm that happened to be going the right direction at the right time to cause really, really widespread flooding. This is the flooding where you saw cabins along the coast all the way up and down New England floating away. That was this storm. And so being able to see what the future will look like is really important to understanding the reality of what we're facing. And there are a lot of solutions. We can do a lot to solve these problems, but we can't do anything unless we talk about it. Remember when we didn't talk about climate change? Remember the past that's definitely not coming back to us when we didn't talk about climate change? We couldn't do anything about it. There are places that we live along our coast now, sometimes places that we've lived in the 400 years since colonization, a lot of places where the Massachusetts and the Wampanoag and the Pawtucket people have been living since time immemorial, that just won't be safe to live in anymore. And no matter how hard we try to build our way out of this problem, fighting nature has its limits. We've been trying to fight nature for a really long time, and we don't win. Nobody wins when we fight nature. But there's a whole suite of tools and thousands of people across Massachusetts and beyond who are working really, really hard to meet this moment. And we need a toolbox. If you only have one tool, you can only solve one kind of problem. But there's a whole suite of tools that I can talk to any of you about at length later on in my 8 minutes. I'm going to focus on a gap in the toolbox. And that is, there we go, eliminating risk. We're really good at building seawalls to say, ocean, you stay over there, we'll stay over here, deal. The ocean doesn't hold up that end of the deal, and we like being able to go to the ocean. We love protecting coastal areas. We do a lot of that work at TNC, and it's really important, but we've run out of coastal areas to protect. There's only so much we can do. There's a lot of other tools that we can use by working with nature, by changing the way that our infrastructure works to keep ourselves safer and to stop fighting nature. But the best way to stop fighting nature is to recognize that there are some places that we just aren't going to be able to keep living, that we're going to have to proactively and safely move out of the way of flooding. And that gives us an opportunity to really think about what happens to the people who have to move. Can they stay in their communities and build that really critical social resilience? Your friends, your neighbors, your faith communities, your schools, your job, your doctor, your soccer league that you derive so much connection to. How do we help keep people in their communities in safer housing that doesn't flood? How do we make sure that your utility lines and your wastewater system is safe and doesn't flood? And how do we think about what happens to the land after we help people move off of it? And so there's a lot of ways to move out of the floodplain, and this is really a way to eliminate risk. A lot of times policymakers and other scientists and practitioners talk about this as managed retreat. All of us acknowledge that term is terrible, but also it is the term that you will most frequently hear when talking about this idea of eliminating flood risk by getting out of the floodplain. There's a lot of work happening on this, for example, in Vermont after Hurricane Irene. They recognized, hey, these rivers are moving. Maybe we should get out of their way. And it's hard, and it really takes a lot to understand what this means for a small coastal community that gets a lot of their income from property taxes in their big coastal property, in their big coastal properties. It's expensive. Where are we getting the money to buy a house and then tear it down and then restore that land? It's painful. This is your home. This is where you have had immense joy and you've gotten through pain. This is your safe space that is now less safe than it used to be. There's a really, really high potential that just as our homeownership system perpetuates deep inequities along racial lines and along all sorts of other lines, that these programs to do managed retreat could do the same. And there's a lot of evidence that a lot of government programs under all administrations, a lot of these relief programs disproportionately benefit white, wealthier homeowners. And we have to be able to work across different sectors. We have to be able to work with lots of different people who we're not used to working with. And so why are we even thinking about this? Like, this is hard. This is expensive. This is painful. But the alternative is that people are getting flooded in their homes. People are stranded when the road that they need to get from their home to emergency services is underwater. This is Nantucket. Again, it happened to be raining in this picture. That was just a high tide day. And it's an opportunity to figure out, how do we keep people safer? How do we give people the tools to keep themselves and their families safer? And at the same time, how can we reimagine our relationship to the coast? We can still love the coast. We can still stay close to the coast. We just don't necessarily have safe places to live that close to the coast anymore. And it's also an opportunity to give our coastal habitats much needed space to survive. And so if we get this right, if we can plan proactively to connect our coastal ecosystems and help people move to safer homes, we can open opportunities for dynamic, functional ecosystems along our coast that we have very little of left right now. We can help people get the tools they need to avoid having to face flood losses in the first place. Moving sucks, as Somebody who's moved too many times? Moving sucks. Moving sucks less than losing everything in a flood. And so this is an opportunity, but also we aren't talking about this because of all those reasons that it's so hard. And so the work that I'm doing right now is talking about this, is creating space for practitioners, people who work on coastal adaptation, to be having these conversations, to create spaces for communities and residents to have these conversations in ways that feel accessible and safe. Because we can do all the science we want. We can say, I have the science. It tells me that everything's going to be terrible really soon. And if you can't engage people with that, if you can't have these conversations, if you can't help visualize the future, nothing's going to happen. And so this project that I'm working on right now with an incredible network of partners, supported by a really great grant and partnership from the Office of Coastal Zone Management, we're building a professional peer learning network to bring people who work on this together. We used to affectionately call it the Managed Retreat Support Group. We still nickname it that, but now it's technically the Proactive Coastal Relocation Network. And so we're bringing people together to provide training, both in person and virtually, a space to have a colleague who is working on the same challenges. We're also making it easier for people to get the information they need. This information is across a whole bunch of different sectors. None of us are an expert in all of them. It's hard to find the right information. So we are gathering information and putting it all in one place so it's easy to find and understand. And we're meeting community members and residents in high flood risk areas where they're at so that they can share with us what they want to see and what the future of the coast that they want. Because the reality is that we have to build our future coast together, driven by science, but also really keeping the heart, so we have science and compassion and creativity all working together. I think, yeah, you can do that. And yeah, so I'm gonna pass it over to Jessica to talk about just a little bit off the coast.
All right, thank you so much, Emma. That was great. Emma, everyone. All right, so my name is Jessica. I'm a marine ecologist. I work with Northeastern University and the Nature Conservancy. And I'm going to be taking you all on a journey out of the floodplain and into the oceans while we talk about eelgrass and oyster aquaculture. So first of all, what is eelgrass? Eelgrass is a marine plant, and it grows in shallow bays in coastal areas all over the world. This picture shows you what a healthy eelgrass meadow looks like. And I like to show this map to show just how common eelgrass is. So all of these light green areas that you're seeing are places that we have eelgrass. And eelgrass is actually just one species of seagrass, which is a broader group of ocean grasses that are basically on all of these coasts. So they're really widespread, and as you can see from the green zone, we have them right here in Massachusetts. And real quick, I want to show you this great picture because I love crabs personally, and that's a crab in our local eelgrass bed. And just to shout out some of the other organizations that work really hard to preserve our eelgrass beds, the Nature Conservancy, NOAA, Mass Bays, and Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. And so I'd like to start by telling you a little about why eelgrass is important. Eelgrass functions as a nursery habitat, by which we mean that a lot of animals like fish and crabs and other invertebrates like to raise their young in the eelgrass beds. It provides a lot of places for the young to hide from predators, and it provides just sort of a nice, gentle environment for them to grow up before they go out to the open ocean. Also provides foraging for seabirds, both local and migratory seabirds. So it provides a home for a lot of animals out in the ocean. And additionally, it provides habitat for a lot of shellfish, shellfish that we like to eat. So for example, scallops, mussels, oysters, and clams. They like to live in the same sort of shallow coastal areas as seagrass. And the research shows us that they tend to grow better and do better in seagrass beds. So in addition to providing a habitat for all of these animals, eelgrass also provides carbon sequestration, which means that like terrestrial forests, eelgrass pulls carbon dioxide out of the water and sequesters it in its roots. So it helps us fight climate change. Additionally, those roots actually stabilize the sediment, which reduces coastal erosion, and they provide wave attenuation, which means that when waves come and wash over the eelgrass bed, the eelgrass, just through friction, slows them down, and it can reduce some of the storm surge and coastal flooding that we're seeing. It's not going to fix, coastal flooding, but it can help contribute to lessening it a little bit.
It helps.
But sadly, as with so many ecosystems, eelgrass has declined precipitously. I've pulled a few local news stories here, but all over the world, eelgrass has been declining. And there's a lot of factors that contribute to eelgrass decline. One of them is climate change. Eelgrass in North America only grows down to North Carolina, and as water warms, it's losing ground rapidly and coming up north. Another one is nutrient pollution. So as we have fertilizer and other things running out of agricultural areas and cities, those fuel algal blooms in bays, and those blooms choke out the eelgrass and kill them. There are also diseases that specifically target eelgrass, unfortunately. There's actually been a big spike in eelgrass wasting disease in recent years, likely due to climate change, creating warmer conditions that help the disease thrive. Damage from anchors and propellers is another big one. This picture shows a seagrass bed. It can be in very shallow areas. So you can see here where boats have gone through and created big scars in the eelgrass bed. And finally, invasive species is another big one. For example, we have invasive green crabs here in New England. And when they're digging up for prey, they'll often uproot the eelgrass, killing it. So there's unfortunately a lot of factors going against eelgrass. But I'd like to talk about one thing that could potentially benefit both eelgrass and our local economy, and that is oyster aquaculture. So oyster aquaculture and eelgrass both tend to occur in a lot of the same areas or shallow bays around Massachusetts. And oyster aquaculture is a really major part of our coastal economy here. In 2019, oyster aquaculture generated $30 million in Massachusetts. I'm sure that number has gone up since then. And right now, there's a big question, actually, about whether oyster aquaculture is beneficial or harmful for eelgrass. So right now, if you're an oyster grower and you want to start a lease, you need to have a 25-foot buffer from the nearest eelgrass bed. But there's a lot of uncertainty about whether that's really necessary. There are both positive and negative effects of oyster aquaculture on eelgrass. In terms of positive, oysters are great for water quality. I talked about the issue of runoff. Oysters filter feed, and they've been shown to have a huge positive effect on water quality. They can also fertilize the sediment. The feces that they add to the sediment can actually cause a big boost in growth for seagrass, and they can provide habitat for animals that can benefit eelgrass. However, on the negative, if we put out oyster aquaculture over eelgrass, the shading can potentially kill the eelgrass. Trampling while growers are tending to their setup can cause a decline in eelgrass. And finally, just plain competition for space. If you're putting down oyster cages, then it might kill the eelgrass underneath. So colleagues and I are working right now on designing an experiment to understand how distance of eelgrass from oyster farms could potentially affect the eelgrass. So right now, the law is the 25-foot buffer. We'd like to do some science to see, does that actually hold up? So we're going to be surveying the eelgrass at different distances from the oyster aquaculture setups to see how densely and healthfully is the eelgrass growing at different areas. And we're excited for this project. We hope that the results will inform how eelgrass and oyster aquaculture can be managed to benefit both, because both can be important to our coastal economies and our coastal ecosystems. And we're just in a really crucial time to protect and study our coastal ecosystems and economies. It's important to understand how these different elements will interact and how, in the face of climate change, nutrient pollution, and other challenges, they might be able to benefit each other, or if oyster aquaculture isn't going to have a positive effect, how we can design our bays to make sure that there's room for both. And with that, I'd like to shout out a few more of the groups that are doing really amazing work to preserve eelgrass in not only Massachusetts, but larger in the New England and Northeast area. I feel really privileged to work with a lot of these folks. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and pass it on to Rebecca.
Other way.
Ooh. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca McGee Tuck, and I'm a found object fiber sculptor and working in Massachusetts. And I collect most of my materials, almost 100% of them, along the rack line of the coast of the beaches of Massachusetts. And if you don't know what the rack line is, I'll tell you. I think you probably do, because if you've walked on a beach before. But it's the line of debris where the high tide drops debris, and then as it recedes, it leaves it there in a line, and you can see it as I'm walking along the rack line here. Ooh, this side. So these are some scenes from the rack line, and when I'm walking the beach every day in the good weather and a couple times a month at this time of year, but I'm collecting between 5 and 50 pounds of debris every time I go on a walk at the beach. I carry with me a bag and a knife to cut things free. Sometimes I bring along a cart to carry things with me. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong side. So the beach that I walk on most of the time, my beach, is Humrock Beach between Marshfield and Scituate. And you may know that beach because it's always being featured on the news because of the intense storms that are there. So the weather people like to show up there to watch the water breach the seawalls. And you can see in this bottom picture how intense the storms are. In 2023, the Bell buoy that is usually out showing the mouth of the river was washed ashore after an intense storm. And on the 2-mile stretch of beach that's called Humrock Beach, at the very end it's a peninsula that ends in this drumlin. And so for the past 10 years, I've been walking along, watching this World War II historic watchtower slowly get closer and closer to the edge, and eventually it's going to fall into the ocean. So these are the types of materials that I'm attracted to, that picking up along the beach, the fiber, its materials. I do collect everything that I see, and then when I get back from my walks, I'll separate it, clean it, I'll recycle what I can, I'll keep what I can, I'll trade with some artists. Some things have to go back into the waste stream. I do feel like I have an interesting position because not everybody has a chance to, as part of their practice or part of their job, walk and notice what's happening daily in one location. So I do notice trends in what are coming ashore. Just a couple examples over here with the cans. After a nor'easter, one time there was hundreds of these really worn down aluminum cans on the beach. And this one here is a typical like midsummer morning collection haul. So in the season, I'll get a lot of toys. So I've created this give and take box, which is pretty close to the town beach entrance, where I leave the toys that I find and people can take them or put what they find in there too. A very important part of my art practice is trying to connect the materials that I'm finding with my art to tell the story of what I'm seeing and what I'm using as my art materials. This particular piece is called The Day After because all the materials I collected the day after the 4th of July, which happens to be the most dirty day to collect things off the beach, just from all the activity on the beach. And this particular year I picked up 5 construction bags of this blue styrofoam, and that is the material that is packaging these fireworks. So as people were lighting up fireworks, they were leaving them on the beach, and then they were washing away or staying on the rack line. I have a couple of pictures of some of the artwork I make. This is called Tidal Creed, and here I placed it along the rack line. That was fun. This is the Rogue balloon robe, and it's made with a bunch of balloons. Are a very common material that I find on the beach. I find like at least 3 every time I walk. And then the nor'easter is made with washed ashore marine debris, ghost gear. And this is the latest piece that I just finished making, and it's made with all the rope and line weaving on a large loom. So I don't just walk myself. I join a lot of groups to make a bigger impact. And so one of the groups that I have been joining up with is the Center for Coastal Studies. And just for example, the last year and a half I've helped them with a week-long stay at Cuttyhunk Island and at the Boston Harbor Islands, where we removed actual tons of ghost gear that have been there for decades. And with this extra material, because I'm taking a lot of the material back with me from these walks, I've been recently teaching people how to do these weavings. And I really like these kind of opportunities because you're sitting around talking about the materials and people are exchanging information, and it's just a nice atmosphere to talk about these sort of things. And at the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park, with these weaving workshops, then I sewed them all together and created this whale's tail. And the other component of part of my work that's important to me is activism, and Surfrider Foundation is another group that I've been volunteering with, and I was invited with Surfrider for Coastal Recreation Hill Day, where 150 representatives from all over the United States came, and I was one of 4 from Massachusetts, and it was great because we had face-to-face time with all our representatives talking about the important, just conversations about what's important and what affects Massachusetts coastlines as to climate change. And a lot of times I've been often to the State House, where I've been giving testimony about what I'm seeing on the beach and in support of bills that are coming up, like the plastic bag bill and break free from plastic pollution, and extended producer, well, I'm sorry, can't remember the whole one of that one, but the extended producer ban. Sorry. So anyway, this is the final thing I want to talk about is this project that I did last year, where I was invited to be the artist in residence at UMass Dartmouth, and with the sustainability students and the sculpture students, and we had a challenge. I had a challenge to create a sculpture, a performative sculpture with 30,000 plastic nip bottles, because they were trying to ban nip bottles in the area. And so what I did was, after a series of talks and brainstorming with the students, we spent 8 months drilling all 30,000 of the bottles and wiring them and creating together the sculpture monster, a creature from the Plasticine era. And it was paraded through the streets of New Bedford. And hopefully, if the plan goes according, like I think it is, on April 10th, we're going to bring it around again in New Bedford. And it was pretty long. It was a whole city block long, and it took about 50 volunteers to move it. And the whole thing was connected to the expanded bottle bill, where they're trying to ban the nips and also possibly put a deposit on them so they're more aptly, people collect them more. And I just made a little slide of the organizations that I talked about, and anything if you wanted to get involved. And that's, thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we can move the chairs.
Did you want to put up this slide that was that one?
So thank you all for terrific presentations. And we're going to have our conversation now. I have prepared some questions and remarks only as a way of getting going. So maybe I'll start with this one. And there's something that we had talked about. It's not specific about the topic, but kind of a more meta idea. And it was the idea of making things visible that are otherwise invisible, and that happens in both for artists and scientists. And I'll just start with my statement, which is artists and scientists look at and make manifest what is otherwise invisible. And that emphasizes the importance of noticing, observing. And those are two things that are so important for both art making, the process, and science thinking and that process. And artists help visualize a problem. And it seems for all all fields, artists and scientists, that process of making something visible or understood is inherent. It's part of like what gets you, up in the morning. So I'd like for each of you to talk about how that functions for you and maybe, specifically to your respective projects. So it's a big idea.
So I love science. I've been a scientist since before I knew what a scientist was, because I think more of us are scientists than we think. We've like gatekept science and this like, I'll come back to the point eventually. There was a study a few years ago where they asked kids to draw a scientist and pick a scientist out, and it's always like an old white dude in a lab coat. And so I love going and talking to kids and be like, no, when I do science, I'm hip deep in mud looking for stuff. I'm in a boat pulling water samples. But the reality is what our science is telling us is that we need to do things differently. Science is real clear that the way that we are building our world and living our lives right now can't be the way that we do it in the future. But it is always easier to say, let's go back and do it the way we used to do it with rose-colored glasses than it is to say, let's build something completely new. And unless scientists get better at drawing those pictures, whether they are through stories or art that puts a mirror up, or collaborative activities and visioning exercises with people to say this is what our future can look like, it's gonna be really hard to get out of this like, oh God, everything's terrible, which I fall into a lot. And the way that we get out of that is by making it so that we can see the future that we want. And if we can't see it, we can't do it. Like, whether that your version of seeing it is painting it or having long, winding conversations about it or telling stories or writing a song or doing a dance, you have to be able to show and see it and communicate about it.
Well, for me, sorry.
No, I think that
Too
you're
close?
picking up my mic. I can
Yeah.
just see some.
Is that better? I don't know if I can turn it down.
Yeah, we can.
Turn
We
down
can
my
have it.
voice. So I like to talk to people about eelgrass because I get the impression that people often don't know that eelgrass exists. And I think that one way that art comes into my work as science is that scientists, we aren't always taught how to communicate with science. In fact, until recent years, it was honestly considered in the science world to be a little like below scientists to be doing communicating. I do think that that's changed a little bit, and there's no longer this perception that scientists should be like away from everyone and sort of up in the tower. But still, I think that art can teach us a lot about how to communicate, because ultimately I think that one thing that art and science have in common is that both are ways of trying to understand the world just through different lenses. So I think that whenever I can learn from artists who work with like using ecological data to inform their art or using ocean materials to inform their art, I think I can always get something great out of that about how to communicate and teach more people about eelgrass.
Can you just repeat the gist of the...
Sure. So we were talking about how artists and scientists are interested in making manifest what is invisible.
Okay, yeah.
And that's a broad subject.
Yeah, no, I get it. But I guess
Is that enough?
Yeah. So
okay.
one of the ways that I feel like I do that is I started doing last summer a project where I was collecting debris on a regular walk that I would do, and I would hold that, just separate it for just the day's collection, and I would challenge myself to make a sculpture with just the debris of one day, kind of like a visual journal of what I was collecting. And I did that for about 20 days. I mean, the sculpture didn't take one day, the collection took a day, and then I sort of created them. But just to give a visualization of just the vast amount of debris that I was finding and things that I was collecting. So I think that's one way that I've been trying to like show it.
Right.
Did you do the sculpture on the beach?
No, I'll bring it back, so I'll collect it and I'll mark it by a day. It's kind of, I mean, that's my science where I'm
Right,
excited.
that's your data processing.
My data process,
That's your data.
yeah, so it's my Home Depot bucket data process, yeah. So, but at the end of, with the 20 days, it's I have some of them over on the table that you could look at, the one-day works.
You would be shocked at how much of the normal science, traditional science, also relies on Home Depot buckets.
Oh, so many.
PVC pipes too.
Another thing that we were talking about a couple weeks ago was, I think, Emma, you had posed the question, what have you noticed in the past year that has increased? And for all of you, it was the effect of erosion, increased effect of erosion, the effects of climate change. So what were you seeing more of in your respective practices?
Oh. Well, what was I seeing more of? Well, I showed on those couple slides that there are trends in materials that are being washed ashore depending on the time of year, depending on the storms. I think that I notice that more when I'm doing beach cleanups with Surfrider Foundation, because we're actually marking down everything and keeping a tally of just how many cigarette butts or Dunkin' Donuts straws there are, or unusual materials. So as to things washing ashore, the most things that I noticed that I was the most surprised at are the fact that, like I said, there's at least 3 balloons, there was 5 bags of the foam. Anytime that I'm coming back with a 50-pound bag of debris, I wish that I could just scream and show everybody in a way. So sculpture is the way that I'm able to do it.
I'm actually curious, are there scientists that go on your debris walks?
Well, when I'm with the larger groups, there are scientists and there are also coastal study specialists.
Well, and also, I mean, the Surfrider data collection, that is community science. That is science that any of us, the Ocean Conservancy and Surfrider and a bunch of other organizations have data sheets. So if you're going out and doing a beach cleanup anywhere, or if you go with the Charles River Watershed Association, the Mystic River Watershed Association, and do a cleanup, they will give you a data sheet. And it can be somebody in your group's job to track the data, because they use that for advocacy. And so yes, there are scientists, and sometimes they just don't have fancy degrees. Sometimes they have kindergarten diplomas. Get a first grader counting straws.
Yeah, that's cool.
I can add to that I did my Ph.D. in San Diego, and I spent a lot of time on the beaches out there collecting materials for my research, whether it was clams or eelgrass, and often children would come along and be very excited to see what I was doing, and sometimes they'd actually want to help out, which was great. So I think that kids are very motivated and excited. And so was the original question, how do we see climate change manifesting in our work? Is that right?
Yeah.
So during my PhD, I did one of my chapters focused on climate change effects on eelgrass. And so I'd collect eelgrass out in the field and grow them in tanks in the lab at different temperatures. And it was really clear that even with just a couple degrees difference, the eelgrass started to die. It started to become very thin and sort of weak and spindly. So I think it drove home for me how even just a small change in temperature had a really big effect on these ecosystems, which are already on the decline and which support so many species. So it was interesting to learn, but very sad.
Yeah, I think the last year it's hard to, there's only one thing that I can't get past the block of 2025, specifically since, say, the end of January 2025. There's a block there. It's been a long 3 months. But I think the change that I've been seeing in myself is my climate grief is easier to trigger. I've been working on climate change for a long time. I've been, thinking, I've been immersed and spending as much time as I possibly could in the outdoors for, at this point, like more than 30 years, and getting terrifyingly close to 40 years. And the idea of these places that I have known my whole life have tangible change. And the world that we're living in isn't changing fast enough to keep up. And that is, sorry, I promised I wasn't gonna be depressing, but that's where I'm at right now. But on the other hand, we are at tipping points in good ways. We are at tipping points where after the election, I heard from somebody high up in an environmental organization, oh yeah, I was talking with some people who, one of them was, asking if coal was gonna come back, and all these energy executives said, absolutely not, coal makes no sense anymore. And so we're at these tipping points when it comes to buying a Tesla is not just a liberal California and Massachusetts thing to do anymore. And if you don't want to buy a Tesla, there's a lot of other really great electric cars, and we're expanding our charging infrastructure. We have people who are understanding that the things that we do in our communities with the people who live near us, and not just the people who live on our street who we see every day, but the people in our larger communities, that we have to come together to do things differently. And so like in the last couple years, not just to stick to the last year, my grief has gotten higher. For me personally, I love the ocean, but in my heart of hearts, I'm a mountains and lakes person. And there was a huge storm that wiped out a ski area, Sunday River, up in Maine, right before the Christmas week. And that hit me really hard, not necessarily because I wanted to go skiing, but because all those people who make their entire living and rely on the climate. But also seeing everybody band together, and the industries that rely on the planet, the insurance industry is taking action to figure out how do we move to the next step. So I have a lot of grief and a lot of hope mixed together, which I also take pleasure from knowing that I'm not alone in that.
There's a lot of back and forth, feelings with all these things. I guess when I'm thinking about the materials I'm using, you heard me saying that, oh, I really love the texture of that, and oh, that's so beautiful. But honestly, it's go scare, it's trash, and it's not good. So when I'm talking about my artwork, I feel like I have two minds. To say that the materials, I feel good about the fact that I'm taking them out of the environment and making them into something else. But also when I'm showing it to people and I have to talk about it and they're saying, oh my God, that's being found on the beach, then it oh yeah, so there's two ways of thinking about these things. And so I think the art part is my positive explosion to help you.
Yeah, I think we collectively look to you for our hope. I mean, that's how I feel. Like, I'm so glad you're doing those studies and, walking around in your boots and whatnot. It makes me feel like we are doing something, And also, Rebecca, your project involves now, it's not just about making the thing, it really is about conversations and communication and the things that the scientists need and want as well, so.
Yeah. On the note of, I feel like I went too dark for a minute there, but 3 other really quick things that bring me hope and joy. One, there is social science that's coming out from the Yale program on climate change communication, which is showing that people are more than ever supportive of policies that fight climate change, and also that people are talking about it. Because I cannot emphasize enough, if we don't talk about it, we do nothing. So the fact that we are having conversations and that they are action-oriented conversations, it is what can we do? And there are answers now. There are a lot of answers. There's no one right answer. There's a lot of ways we got ourselves into this problem, which means that there's a lot of right ways to get out of this problem. So that's one. 2, when I started working on Managed Retreat, I started working on Managed Retreat because people couldn't talk about it. I would talk to municipal staff and other people, and I would say, so are you guys thinking about the fact that this place is flooding now, and that the best thing to do might be to help people get out? And they'd be like, no, we can't talk about that. And now they are flocking to our peer learning network. I was at a coastal engineering and construction conference today, and they came up there. This is becoming something that we're talking about. And third, I can't emphasize enough, when I was in college, which was not that long ago, I was looked down on because I thought it was stupid to use sciencey words that nobody understands when I'm talking to people who don't speak those sciencey words. But to prove that you're smart, you have to use fancy words that nobody understands, right? And if you care about connecting with people about science, you're a bad scientist. I got told the weekend of my college graduation that if I wanted to do work with communities and teach, and I also wanted to do science, I should do science first because I could always go back to teaching. And if I went to teach first, they would never accept me as a real scientist. Well, I spent years teaching environmental education and outdoor education, and that is an asset to me every day in my science career. And people who are coming out of school 10, 15 years after I did, they are getting those lessons and they are getting the training to be communicators, because it's not just something that you're born with, it's a skill. And it's a technical suite of tools, I say as I look at my communications team over there, that we are training scientists to come out with so science can have more impact.
All good.
Good.
I think this might be a really good moment to open it up to the audience for questions and answers. And we have a question here.
Well, I do have a question. So I've actually had the chance to walk through the red zone outside Christchurch a couple times, and that's an area that in Christchurch Metro, when they had the big earthquake in 2010, I believe it was. Imagine in Boston if you had to completely raise Newton because the land there had liquefied and became unstable. So my question sort of is about like the idea of creating buffer zones. Does it have to always take a really horrible disaster to engineer change, or are there places that are actually being more proactive without the loss of without the earth just saying, hey, guess what? You are no longer habitable.
That is a great question, and I am working every single day to try to make that happen, because crisis can be opportunity, but crisis means crisis. Crisis means pain and loss, and in cases, death or injury that, let's prevent crisis. But preventing crisis requires proactive planning, and it is always easier to get funding and get support and to get political buy-in for the crisis that happened, because if you prevent the crisis, well, maybe you just spend all this money for nothing. But we know the science, we know what's coming, and so I am seeing there are several communities across Massachusetts that are proactively moving. They haven't done it yet, but they are coming to my project team and to me and saying, hey, we're starting to think about this, what resources are there? And the state of Massachusetts is trying to starting to try to figure out what resources can we provide. And so we're starting to think about this. And it's slow, but the more work we do and the more we can show, this has happened already in other places. There are places, it's a lot in the Southeast, but that was catalyzed by crisis. Vermont and New Jersey and New York, Hurricanes Irene and Sandy, they were the catalysts of crisis, or they were the crises that catalyzed action. And so I think that some of the power of these images is showing what the crisis will look like. This actually isn't that deep of a flood. You can see the bottoms of the stairs. There were really, really damaging floods in this, but this looks bad. Imagine if it was higher. That car is totaled. But aside from that, most of these houses seem like they probably got through okay. If you live in this part of Revere, tell me if I'm totally wrong. But we need to get better at creating spaces for people to talk about what could this look like if we could plan without relying on crisis to be our catalyst.
I was going to say,
yeah, sure.
Could I add something to that? I think a great point that you just made is that when there's a crisis, you can say I need funding for this. But when you've prevented something, that's kind of invisible, right? I think that's a huge problem, and I mean, we're seeing that right now with the dismantling of agencies, right? Like, maybe people don't realize that, like, the park ranger is the person who cleans the toilet at Acadia National Park, or that random dude who sits at the NOAA office is the one who, like, sees that storms are coming. Because, like, it just makes me think, I heard a person say once, like, the EPA doesn't do anything, they just waste all our tax dollars. And I was like, I wish that I could take you in time back to 1970 and then put you on a timeline, sorry about the feedback, where you could see the world where there wasn't an EPA, because when they started the EPA, there was actually rivers on fire. So people, like, what's been fixed behind the scenes is invisible, right? So I think it's really unfortunate that often these things are catalyzed by crises, because what people are already doing, spending their whole lives making these things not happen, sometimes the public can't see that. And, you know, to be honest, I'm not a social scientist. I don't know how we get people to see that, but it makes me real angry.
Talk about it.
Yeah, there you go. You talk about it. And people like you are doing this work, which I appreciate a lot.
Also not a social scientist.
Yeah.
Well, who lives along the coast of Massachusetts? I see these houses, I don't know who's in them, and I'm curious about who they are.
A whole cross-section of the
I actually
residents.
do. You think
Jessica!
I wouldn't be able to?
You all walk the coasts.
No, I mean, I live in Swampscott on the coast.
Okay, no, fine. I didn't mean specifically, but
Yeah, so I mean,
generally the groups that we find, I assume a lot of wealthy people have looked for the houses by the coast. Well, that's what I'm questioning.
yeah, so coastal communities in Massachusetts range from Newburyport and other places that are famous for being wealthy. There's also some of the poorest parts of Salem, Revere, Winthrop, Lynn. If you go down the coast, we have Hull. We have, and so like I could name towns and you could look up at Google Maps and also name those towns. But one of the really interesting things about the Massachusetts coast is we have these images sorry, it's Friday night and my words are gone for the week.
It's good,
but
no problem.
it is truly a cross-section of people who are renters, who are limited English language speakers, who are low income, who are new Americans, who have just moved here from somewhere else, often as climate refugees themselves. And then we have some of the wealthiest people in the world with their second homes, their seventh homes along the coast. And as we're thinking about how do we adapt on the coast, we have to be thinking about meeting all those people, because frankly, if it's your seventh house, you can figure out whatever you need to do with your seventh house. And there are a lot more people who it's their home. It is their primary, only home. It is people who have saved to buy their dream house that is walking distance to their favorite beach. So I think that it's a great question, because it's a really, really common misconception that the Massachusetts coast is exclusively wealthy. And it's a really, there's a lot of wealthy people along the coast, and there's also a lot of very much not wealthy people along the coast.
Who do I see on the coast? I see, well, I'll go to, it's a range of, you know, my parents live on the Cape, and I'm down there, and in Marshfield, it's a whole vast, you know, it's all different welts that are down in Marshfield and Scituate. Have you ever seen the high school in Hull? It's like at the end of a peninsula. It's like right on three quarters of it is surrounded by the ocean.
And that's the elementary school in Quincy.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yes, back there.
I had a question about how is the Nature Conservancy engaging the private sector, corporates, about obviously climate risks and very much translate to business risk. And in this climate, we've seen a lot of like scale back on sustainability commitments by corporates. So like, how are you translating that message on like, actually this is really good for your business?
There are people at the Nature Conservancy who are doing this very well, and I don't know who they are or what they're doing, which is why I'm looking over here.
I'm not sure either, but we can get that information for you.
I do know that one of the industries that I talk to is there's some folks from the insurance industry who are really trying to figure this out because, you know, who knows best where it's going to flood and who doesn't let politics or anything mess with their actuarial, very detailed assessments of what's going to flood? The insurance industry. Yeah, so that's one industry that I know we're engaging with, and we have all these novel insurance products. And it's a great question that somebody is doing something, and I know we are, and I don't know what it is. Have you listened to any cool webinars lately that I haven't?
You know, I don't think I can really answer that question, but I'm sure that there are folks at TNC doing hard work on that.
Oh, there are.
Yeah, Rebecca.
Could each of you share maybe one thing from your respective sector or industry that you would want us to take home as individuals, like something that we can do or a way we can engage with our community, respective to what you all are doing in this space?
What you can do right now there's a lot of interest in climate engaged artists, and there's groups. There's a lot of shows going on. I can't name them right now, but I do know that I'm involved with a couple climate engaged artist groups, and right now people are inviting us to show at like alternative spaces. Like Lab Central has invited us to come and show artwork in their labs, and I really love that sort of place to show artwork because it's not the regular gallery. Libraries and schools are showing lots of climate engaged artwork, and it just creates a conversation, and especially with kids at schools and in libraries and in public places. So what your question was, how to get engaged with the climate and art?
Yeah, or like how you would recommend, or like kind of a call to action for all of us. And so I guess I would take away from that, like get involved with your local library.
Yeah, well, also I would just suggest to join a group like in my case I joined the Surfrider and the Center for Coastal Studies cleanups, but I would say start by going to one of the climate engaged art shows, and all the artists there are wanting to talk about what they're involved in, and everybody is involved in so many different aspects of it. Mine just happens to be with the ocean, but I would say there's a climate show at the Mosesian Center right now, and I don't know, you can talk to me afterwards. I can tell you where some places are to go.
My show is going to be there for it.
Yes.
I think we have, oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. I think that's a great question, and there's honestly so many things that come to mind. Like, I feel like I could talk about that for a long time, because I think one thing, where it's such a crucial moment where there's a lot of bad things going on, and I think the worst thing that we can do is just think well, there's nothing that I can do. And I think it's understandable when people come to that conclusion, because everything that's going on is so huge and depressing. But I also think that it's really the wrong path. So what I would recommend is I think it's always great. Should I do something differently?
Yeah, speak up.
Speak up. Okay, speak louder. Connecting with nature, I think, is something I always want people to do, because as this quote kind of says, I think that what people can connect with in terms of nature is what they'll care about. So when I think about oceans and coasts and seagrass, the more that people can connect with nature, the better. And I also think that, don't let anyone tell you that what you do doesn't matter. I think a lot of people like to say what does it matter if I use less plastic when Coca-Cola is the biggest contributor to plastic pollution ever. But what I would say is that cultural change, which is collective action among many people, happens when we act and when we tell people about it. And I don't mean lecturing people, because nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to hear you telling them that you're looking down on them for using a plastic bottle. But just if you show that you're doing things differently and explain why it's important to you, I mean, that's how things change. This isn't the same world that it was in 1950, 1960, whatever. And that's because of cultural change that came from individuals who decided that they wanted to do things differently. So I think that's what I'd say in terms of do what you can to try to address this crisis, and try not to let people say well, it doesn't matter, because it does.
And nothing's too small.
Yeah, nothing's too small.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that is a perfect place to end our conversation. And I want to thank you three for just terrific thinking and all that you're doing.